there is important to learn more about the concept of sociology of unintended. I think in my mind, and I think we will learn from Prof. Mica about the concept, and I think the unintended concept is related to the theory of functionalism or structural functionalism in sociology. In Indonesia, the theory is very common and very common to refer during 1980s and 90s. Almost all students of sociology in Indonesia refer to the theory of functionalism. So I think the concept of unintended sociology is very important as maybe as a critic to the theory of functionalism. And I hope in the future, Prof. Mica, you can to come to Indonesia maybe, and we can develop maybe a research collaboration and other collaboration to us between Gajah Mada University and University of Warsaw in Poland. In Poland, yeah. So thank you very much for Mr. Dr. Subraja.
You're welcome.
Who initiate this lecture, and also thank you for Sorek, Bung Ragil, Bung Abe Widyanta for organizing this activity. And I hope that acara will be run with smoothly and fruitful. Thank you very much. Selamat berdiskusi, selamat mendengar kuliah dari Prof. Mica. Terima kasih. Selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Dr. Suharko, for his remarks and for reminding us that we actually quite familiar with the ideas, the horizon of sociology and of unintended, especially Indonesian context. And we are happy here to listen to the updates, to the development that we will learn from public lecture that will be delivered by Mica and Mas Praja. Okay, next, before we jump to Professor Mica's and Mas Praja's presentation, we will have our time to listen to Director of Social Research Center, Department of Sociology, Dr. Abe Widyanta, to give his remarks. Please, Mas Abe, time and screen is yours.
Thank you, Bung Ragil. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen in Indonesia, and good morning to Adriana Mica, PhD, who currently in Polandia. The Honorable Professor Dr. Suharko, the head of Sociology Department at Gajah Mada University, Honorable Adriana Mica, PhD, as keynote speaker in public lectures, and Dr. Supraja as the panelist, and dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming all of you to public lecture entitled Failure and Unintended Theory, Definition, and Explorations. This public lecture was organized by the Social Research Center, Department of Sociology, FISIPOL, UGM. Through this public lecture, the Sociology Department intends to develop theoretical and methodological perspectives to strengthen the scientific knowledge of undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral students. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously help us make this event come together to become a success. We couldn't have done it without you. We, the Social Research Center team, hope that this public discussion can contribute to strengthening the student capacity in mastering theoretical perspective and methodologies that can be applied in their social research. Well, I do not want to take too much of your time, of course. I need to hand over it to Gregorius Ragil Wibawanto, our today's moderator, to introduce our speakers to all of you. And I would like to say once more, on behalf of the seminar organizer, welcome. It's great to see many of you here. I'm sure that you all will feel enriched with knowledge after completion of this event. And I welcome you all once again to the public lecture and hope that you will all have a great time ahead. Thank you, Bung Ragil, Dr. Mica, and Dr. Supraja.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Avi Widianta, for the remarks. And I'm very happy to look at the participants number. Now we have 71 souls in this room, and I'm excited to hear the public lecture from Adriana Mica and also from Mas Praja. Please give me more time to introduce our presenter to the audience right now. First, we will have Adriana Mica. Adriana Mica is an assistant professor and head of research unit on action and consequences at the Institute of Social Prevention and Resocialization, University of Warsaw. Her research interests include sociology of possibility and ignorance, critical failure studies, theory of randomness, unintended consequences, and crisis management. She is the co-author of Ignorance and Change, Anticipatory Knowledge, and the European Union Crisis, published by Knowledge 2021, and also author of Sociology as Analysis of the Unintended, from the problem of ignorance to the discovery of possible. Discovery. Oh, yep. Also published by Knowledge in 2018. She's currently working on a co-author book, The Imaginary of Failure, Coming to Terms with Contingency and Inequality in Policy Making, with Mikołaj Pawlak and Paweł Kubicki. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. As well as co-editing Knowledge International Handbook of Failure, Critical Perspective from Sociology and Other Social Sciences, with Anna Horowitz, Mikołaj Pawlak, and Paweł Kubicki also will be published by Routledge. That's and the next one will be Mas Muhammad Supraja. Muhammad Supraja is a senior lecturer at the Department of Sociology, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at Gajah Mada University. He received a doctoral degree in 2009 from the same university. He has several research interests such as sociology theory, Western philosophical thought, sociology of religion, sociology of education, and prophetic of social science. He has some publication, for example, towards prophetic of social science, 2018, Introduction to Jürgen Habermas, critical research methodologies, and author's use, mainstreaming of phenomenology in social sciences. Thank you so much, Mica and Mas Praja, for coming to this discussion. And just a little note for the audience right now, for the participant. First, we will have Professor Mica present the lecture, and then Mas Praja will continue. And then after Mas Praja present the lecture, deliver the lecture, we will have question and answer. So please take a note and also be active if you like to. You can also write your question while the discussion is going in the through the chat room, so I can wrap it up and I will be delivered to the presenter. I hope that's all clear, and I wouldn't take the time again from you guys. So have our great public lecture. Adriana, please, the screen and time and space is yours now.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a bit, is the share visible? So I hope you can see the presentation. I would like to thank you very much for your warm welcome to Professor Suharto. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're audible. All good, Mica.
Yes. For your welcoming to Professor Suharto, Professor Vidivanto, also to Professor Vidyanta. I've just a quick introductory note to this lecture. So we had the occasion to meet with Dr. Supraja in Warsaw in 2018. It was in the framework of a workshop on unintended consequences. And since then, we've been trying to put a collaboration together. So I'm very happy that we have two good news. So the one is that we will have today a conversation about failure and unintended consequences in sociology. I think, as I understood from the presentation of Professor Suharto, we are theoretically quite close, I believe, and we share, I think, the same classical references and also perspective on the future of social theory. And yes, in terms of collaboration between our universities, I think this starts to materialize. I will be joining for a few days your university in February at the invitation of Professor Supraja, and I hope we will all meet in person. So I'm very happy, and I'm very grateful for today's opportunity. Why I believe that there is we have to use like this chance to bring our theoretical perspectives and also empirical experience together. So indeed, there is a functionalist episode in the theory of unintended consequences. Functionalist theory, although today it's not a mainstream theoretical framework in sociology, but it's still, I think, it is one of the most strongest inputs to social theory. But now, if you look at the issues of failure and unintended consequences, I think the approach, I mean, whether it is functionalist or not, but it has to be global. So in this context, and I think this is one of the issues that I will try to show today, that the theoretical perspective, I believe it's much less important than the fact that we need to have a complementary methodology, and we need to approach issues of the unintended and on failure like in a global perspective. I think this mechanism of how we approach the processes is much more important than whether the analytical framework is functionalist, is systemic, or it is relational. So it is still important, but I think because we live in this context of rapidly changing circumstances, of this globalization of crisis, that other issues take also priority in social theory. But let's get back to the topic for today. I'm also impressed by the number, by the huge public for this audience, for this lecture, and I hope we will not disappoint you. But we've been in contact with Dr. Supraja since a few years now, and I believe that there is a synergy that will be, I think you will see that we have like a good communication. So the title of the presentation is Failure and Unintended Theory, Definition of and Exploration. We will look at, I will try to present in a dynamic and maybe hopefully interactive way what is the state of the art on the issues of failure and unintended consequences in social theory today. I have an approach which is informed by, I would say, it's economic sociology. Economic sociology, it's a kind of social theory that looks at mechanisms of processes of financialization, of marketization, of evaluation in social sciences, but it uses the tools of social theory. So we will not try to quantify the dynamic of failure and unintended consequences. We will just look from an approach that somehow connects social theory with contemporary processes, but it takes attention to the fact that crises, failures, and unintended consequences are perceived, for example, that they are calculated, that they are measured, that we have this mechanism of power relations and of discrimination that are based in broader dynamics of neoliberalism. So this is my this is my like intellectual, I would say, inspiration. So it's economic sociology, but please look at it as a contemporary, like refashioned social theory, which, for example, in the North American tradition, builds a lot on Merton, and also, for example, in our region, it relates to the classical theorists who, to a great extent, are functionalists. So, let me just. Okay. So what is the question? So I tried to present these issues of failure and unintended consequence in a way that relates to our context of crisis and contingency and rapidly changing circumstances. So it is like a conventional lecture on failure and unintended consequences, but because we live in this context of globalization of crisis, and we have some experiences in common, I tried to reflect this context of contingency also in the way the presentation is made. So we will there will be a context going and coming between our theoretical framework and the reality we live in. So the question I posed for today, and I was also trying to come up with something new to go beyond a state of the art, was in what way failure and unintended consequences interact today in society and policy making. So why is it useful to have some theoretical knowledge on failure and unintended consequences in order to understand the way in which politicians, policymakers, media, social movement activists react to contemporary crises and unexpected events? And the main conclusion that I would like to underline from the beginning is that there is a connection that you can observe in the rhetoric on failure and unintended consequences. So the failure is quite close to this idea of unintended consequences, but we have to take attention that what we mean today by failure and unintended consequences, it's, for example, completely different than it was in the 80s and in the 90s. So there is an interconnection, there is a nice interaction, but the meaning of failure changed, and also the meaning of the unintended has shifted. What is the general framework is that failure, it's not lack of success, but it's more an issue of ignorance. It's a resource of policymaking, and it is an element that it's more like a lack of lack of preparation. And the unintended also shifted. So it's not the unintended from the 1940s and 1950s, but it's more an issue of unexpectedness and elements that are unanticipated that could have been anticipated. So there is a close connection, but the sociological exploration is to show that failure, the way we understand and experience failure today, it's much more complex than the simple lack of success. And also that the unintended might be it's not anymore the proper sociological term to describe what sociologists had in mind in the functionalist tradition. So the unintended shifted. It's more about something that it's unexpected and you are unprepared for. So we have to understand the shifts in meaning, and then we can reveal the complexity of how failure and the unintended interact in the contemporary society. And social theory, it's very, as I will show, it is proliferating in relation with failure and the unintended, just that we have to have the proper tools to identify what is today meant by failure and the unintended. So when we are looking, I tried to present. I would like to present what is the general state of the art, and in what direction are we moving if we want to connect the failure and the unintended in the contemporary society. So I brought. We will show that there are 8 theses. Like 8 main propositions with regard to the failure and the unintended. This will be the first part of the presentation. Then this will give us a window of opportunity to discuss more closely what is failure, what is unintended, and then in the ending part, I will come back to some conclusions. So I will show what this shift in meaning of the failure and the unintended means, what is the challenge for social theorists and also for public policymakers. But before going forward, so I would just like to draw maybe like a broader picture on the way me and our researchers who are connected with our failure lab are looking at the issue of failure and the unintended consequences. So just to bring you a bit closer to our reality. So indeed, we have like I think we can identify that in Warsaw, at the University of Warsaw, we are looking at failure and unintended consequences, I think like in three main areas. So one is we want to understand what is the connection between crisis and the dynamics of ignorance in the contemporary society. So we were looking at this interaction between crisis and ignorance and how ignorance changes in the context of the refugee crisis in the 2015 and 2016. So this is a research that I was doing with Paweł Kubicki, Anna Hololec, and Mikołaj Pawlak. And this research on crisis, so we tried to understand how politicians are reacting to crisis and unexpected events in the field of migration and asylum policy. And we noticed that it is a discourse about failure, and it is a discourse about the future. So we noticed that politicians and policymakers govern contemporary episodes of crisis and unexpected events by predicting the future. So this brought us to the issue of failure and that we will discuss today. But we also noticed that it was the first time we noticed that failure is not as much lack of success today, but it's something that you project in the future, and it's more about lack of preparation. Yeah, so this was the first theoretical signal that there is a change in how we understand unexpected events and crises. So the management, the temporality of reacting to unexpected events and unintended consequences moves in the future. So the idea is that we have to predict them. So the problem is not that the crisis occurs, but whether we prepare for it and whether we did anticipate it. So in this way, we noticed a change. And certainly when we looked back to the social theory that we will have also the opportunity to engage with today, we noticed that there are also several authors who indicate that today unexpected events and crises are about events that will take place in the future. And there are certainly some consequences at the level of the society because of this shift in temporality. So this is one dimension of research. So how ignorance interacts with crisis. So we are looking at not so much what are crises today, but how they interact with other processes. There is another research that is now undergoing. So we are looking at how elements of globalization of what is global and what is common in the way that various types of failure emerge in the society today. And COVID, it has this, it is the first observable and straightforward globalization of crisis that we can allow us to show in what way in various countries there is a reaction to various failures and unintended consequences in public policy. So we are looking at elements of inequalities of failure in 8 countries, and we show that there is a rhetoric of failure in relation to how COVID-19 and post-pandemic period was governed at the global level, but there is also a language of inequality and invisibility. So some failures are more important, some failures are forgotten. In a country, you have much more like public health issues failures. In other countries, it is much more underlined, this idea of problematic expertise, or how the political elites were exploiting the COVID. So there is an issue of inequality. So we are looking at this at the global level. And this was when we made this decision that we will be looking at failure, the dynamic of failure and unintended consequences. It's much more interesting to be explored at the global level, because you see these regimes of failures and of the unintended. So this is one research that has been going on now. We have researchers, we are a global think tank. We are working in 8 countries, and the idea is that we are now trying, and hopefully we will also manage to bring maybe Indonesia in this equation. So to approach these failures of issues of failures unintended globally. And the main pillars, I would say, it's the University of Warsaw and the University of Columbia and University of Virginia. So now the last like failure and unintended domain of research at the University of Warsaw that we are connected with is we try to change the perspective and to show, it's not a very original idea, but we try to articulate it, that failures, unintended consequences, unexpected events in policymaking, they do not constitute a problem today. Yes, so they actually bring dynamism and are a resource for policymaking. And actually for public policies, it is much more problematic to be ignored and to be marginalized than to experience failures. So we are looking at failure as a resource of public policy. This is a local research at issues of migration, abortion, lack access to abortion, and disability policy in Poland. And but of course, these are public policies which reflect global issues in relation to these 3 domains. So we see that we look at these 3 public policies and we show that in each of them, failure and unintended and unexpected events, it's something different. But actually, if we compare these 3 public policies, the more of a public policy is associated with failures, the more active it is and the more dynamic it is. Yes. So the problem is not lack of success and trying and being implementing public policies, but the problem is when you are not allowed, for example, you are all the time marginalized and you cannot bring, for example, new regulations. So this is much more problematic from public policy. So these are the main 3 ideas. I hope that I showed you what is our empirical and maybe theoretical universe with regard to failure and unintended consequences. The idea is that we are going, we try to connect with research on failure and unintended consequences, which now is developing globally. And to our surprise, even before the pandemic, but now even more, there is a materialization of failure research. So this is one of the fields of study which is now you can see that it is developing, and there is a synergy between researchers in Poland, researchers in United States, researchers in Nigeria, in Chile, in Italy. So there is it's a very prolific site of research, and today I will try to show you why and what is the state of the art. So I would also like to underline that if you have some questions, please feel free to interrupt me. I will not look at it as an interruption, but more as a window of opportunity to make the presentation clearer. So what is our context, and what would be the main ideas with regard to how failure and unintended interact today at the global level? So I was looking at the literature, and I would say that there are a few ideas that come up and that they are very interesting, and I hope you will resonate with them. So one idea, which I think it begins to come up quite frequently, I mean, in the literature, is that failures are not unintentional and anomalous events anymore. Yeah, so here you have, for example, Michael Howlett. He's a figure from public policy, one of the main social theorists who was looking at failure in public policy. He's a Canadian researcher, and he was studying failure in relation to this idea of persistence. What is the source of failures in public policy? And so he has a long tradition of looking at the problems of failure and unexpected events, and he noticed that today actually failures have been changed. So it's not something that it's unintentional that you are surprised with, but actually it's a more like mundane phenomenon in public policy. In that, actually, there is even a dark side of exploitation of these failures. So you see, the clear intuition and exploration of this idea that failures in public policy and unexpected events are actually a resource of action. So let me maybe just quote the author. So public policy failures, Howlett is saying, are often assumed to be unintentional and anomalous events about which well-intentioned governments can learn why they occurred and how they can be corrected. Studies of policy learning need to take these dark sides of policy making more seriously if the risks of policy failure are to be mitigated. So there is a shift of perspective. So you don't see failure as a lack of success that public policymakers try to govern, try to react to, but you realize that failure is much more common and that there is a certain normalization and even exploitation of failures in public policy. There is a dark side. So that Howlett, there is a more like a general idea here that the public policy is not so used to be governed by this idea that policymakers have good intentions, that if there are some unintentional outcomes, this must be unintentional. But now we see that there is a dark side to public policy making. So we can explore this dark side and these behavioral risks, these elements of manipulation, of corruption. They are not something, there are not deviant elements of public policy, but they are part of public policy making. Yeah, so the unintentional event is not so unintentional anymore. So this is an idea. I think Howlett is one of the authors who put it quite nicely. So we have to change the broader perspective that our deeds lead to unintended consequences, because the normative context of our actions and public policy makings, it's more different. Yes. So then another the second argument that comes in the relevant literature, I'm quoting here what I see that are the main representative authors, is that crises are failures. Yeah, so there is a rhetoric. Crises are a frequent occurrence today at the local level and at the global level in our society. But if you look at the rhetoric of crisis, we notice that at some point it goes in the direction of a rhetoric of failure. There is an article published in 2016 also by Jacqueline Best. She's also an author in public policy, but as you know, sociology and public policy, they come very close when they try to understand unintended phenomena and the issue of failure. So she is using this metaphor when crises are failures. Yes. So, for example, we have in Europe the crisis of COVID-19. It is interpreted as a failure, for example, of the public health system, or as a failure of the political elite to govern crisis. Yeah. So crises are interpreted as failures of broader areas of action and of public policy. So this would be the second thesis, that the language, the rhetoric, and the narrative of unintended consequences and failures is very close, and they sometimes overlap. Authors usually try to distinguish what is crisis and what is a failure, but the language and the rhetoric is if you look at the media and public discourse, it's quite close. Another issue with regard to this global and local narrative regarding crisis and failure is that you do not only have crises which are interpreted as failures, but there is an element of contestation. So here in the subtitle of the article by Jacqueline Best, she's using this formulation of contested metrics in international finance and development. But this is an idea, maybe it is much more familiar to you. It was launched by Michel Calon in the 1918, in the book it was published in 1998, Laws of the Markets, where he's using this idea of hot situations and cold situations. So he's also showing that today, success and failures are established upon valuation and upon calculation, but these evaluations are all the time contested. Yes, upon the statistics, might be shown that the managing of the crisis is successful or not. But it is not something that it is established, but it is contested and it's evaluated basically constantly upon statistics. So statistics allow you to contest, and these evaluations sometimes are like stable, and this is a situation of, like, for example, a cold situation, Calonne would frame it, but very often they are debated and they are contested, and in sociological terms, this would be like a hot situation, a hot debate. Yeah, so please remember these ideas that crises are failures, but there is also like a reinterpretation. So there is the evaluation, the public evaluation, it's changing and it is being contestation. And of course, sometimes this contestation is very discreet, sometimes it's in the open, but it's something that we should pay attention to. And this contestation is usually based on calculation and on statistics. So the third idea which appears in the literature is that this is basically quite close to this idea that failures are not unintentional events anymore. Also researchers from public policy, but who have used these tools of social theory, they've been showing that there is this phenomenon of exploitation of crisis, which is happening. So this exploitation of crisis, actually, it's not something that elites are doing. So it's not close to a theory of conspiration, but it's like a very mundane phenomenon. So, so this exploitation of crisis sometimes take place like in anticipation. Here you have a quotation from this three authors who launched this idea of exploitation of crisis, like it was like 10 years back, but the term is now used in articles dealing with the COVID crisis. So they are saying parliamentary opposition figures, interest group leaders, and self-appointed public voices may actively work to discover and inflate crises. So a crisis occurs, an unintended event occurs, and there is an intentional, unintentional exploitation of the event. Yes, so you have to redefine the situation in the crisis. You have to predict what the future will be. You have to prepare. And in this sense, the crisis is inflated and it is being exploited. Sometimes the exploitation is bridges on manipulation. So there are this, for example, you use the context of crisis to advance restrictive regulations for certain groups of people or to increase discrimination. So this exploitation goes quite close to oppression or elements of surveillance. But the idea of the authors is that actually it's something which is happening even at the level of this, for example, naive activists. So crisis, we live in a context of rapidly changing circumstances, and which shows that it is a resource of action and of public policy, and in this sense, it is being exploited. So this would be, I think, the third idea. So now let's go. Maybe another element that was it's been noticed with regard to contemporary failures and unexpected events is that at the beginning these are presented as black swans. So maybe you're familiar with the theoretician Nicholas Taleb. So he introduced various concepts in social sciences. I think the most visible, also, like it's used by commentators on Twitter to explain the reaction to COVID-19, for example, is the one of black swan. So black swan, it's a crisis that it's very rare. It is it causes extreme impact. For example, like COVID-19 or the 2008 financial crisis, or but after a time, when people like normalize the situation, it is considered that it might have been predicted. Yes, so this is the idea of black swan, that at the beginning, the crisis, it's like a black swan, it's something rare, but at the moment you are somehow you normalize the situation, you are tired with the crisis, you don't want to hear about it anymore, then at some point you say that it could have been predicted, and then actually the swan, it's not black anymore, but it's white. Now this idea of retrospective predictability of this phenomenon, that you consider that big crisis could have been predicted, it's something that occurs, and it also was noticed also in relation to the financial crisis of 2008, the refugee crisis of 2015. It's also considered that could have been anticipated. I'm sorry. So there is this general idea that the crises are not unexpected events anymore, but actually that they could have been predicted, but they haven't been. So this idea of strategic ignorance comes in, and then you context. This is also an element of contestation. I just have to drink a bit of water. I'm sorry. So this issue of retrospective predictability, it's also quite important. So you are contesting the unexpectedness and the big impact of the event. So the next thesis, which appears in the literature, this is not very it's not such a common thesis, but I was thinking that it might be, so it's not a mainstream assumption, but it comes out, you can see it from time to time in the literature, is that combining various failures might lead to success. I'm sorry, just a minute. For example, you have to like reacting to the COVID-19 pandemic might be regarded as for example, a failure on various levels. For example, political, normative, public policy. But if you combine these failures, I'm sorry, if you combine these failures, it might lead to success. I found the formulation of this idea in I'm sorry, I just need I have to take something from my throat. I'm sorry, excuse me. So I found this formulation in a thesis by Keller Easterling. She's coming from architecture theory, and she was identifying it as a Parondus, as the as a Parondus paradox. So she was looking at the way in these failures in architecture, they come from an area when they're ignored. So there are a lot of failures and a lot of buildings in architecture which are just simply forgotten. And at some point you have like these big failures in architecture that everybody is talking about. But all these failures, all these big failures, they produce this inflation of discussion. They attract resources, and failure on various levels might lead to some sort of success. So this is also a quite, I think, a nice interpretation. There is also this idea in public policy by Alan Connell, which was advanced, that failure in public policy, it is acknowledged only if it takes place at several levels. For example, political, public policy, in terms of implementation. And it comes back to an idea which exists in social theory, that actually to acknowledge failure, it's something very difficult. Yeah, so the failure has to be complete in order to be acknowledged. Otherwise, if you have various failures at various levels, there might, in the end, you might end up with this recombination that leads to success or to ignore failure, basically. So this is also an idea. It's not, it has not been like explored like straightforwardly as this idea of crisis exploitation, but I think it comes out and it is articulated quite frequently in the literature. The next idea, and we are, I think, reaching like the end of this like articulation of intuitions regarding the interaction between failure and the unintended, is that there is a certain disappointment if you look at the dynamics of failure and crisis at the global level. For example, Jacqueline Best, the same author who drew attention that crises are framed as failures today, she after a few years, she published another article where she's using this idea of quiet failures, of unfailures. So she's showing that you have these big failures, these black swans, but at some point they stop producing the impact that you are expecting. In a way, this is a real, I think this is quite similar to the one of black swan. So you don't see, after some time, you don't see the impact, the very big impact of this big crisis and big unintended events. For example, COVID, the financial crisis, the ecological crisis, which we are expecting to be happening. So the failures, it gets narrowed down. So she's using this idea of quiet failures. There is another author, Aline Grabel. She published a book, When Things Don't Fall Apart, and she looked at the reaction of various authors to the 2008 financial crisis. But I think this is something that you can also, we noticed in relation to the refugee crisis of 2015, and also now in relation to COVID-19, is that social authors are pessimistic that there is a real impact. Yes, for example, and this is the black swan effect. COVID-19 did not really bring a change in the public health policies, that actually this inequalities, it's even bigger, you have bigger disparities. And she's showing, and this is also an idea that was advanced by Albert Hirschman, that when we are facing an unintended event or a failure, we expect that there will be a big impact. We expect that the change will be so meaningful that actually if this change it's not so big, that we retrospectively have this tendency to disavow, to say that it was not a big failure, it was not an unexpected event, it could have been predicted. So it's not only a contestation, but it's a downgrading of the impact. And she's saying that actually crises, unexpected events, even small unintended episodes, they have incremental effects and they lead to, they have evolutionary potential and they lead to change. But it is part of the game that you don't see this change happening and you are all the time contexting. So you probably notice that social theorists are paying attention that failures and unexpected events, it's not about the unexpectedness, but it's this idea that they could have been predicted, and there is this phenomenon of contestation. So you are contesting the unexpectedness, and you are contesting also the impact. And basically, they're not unintentional events anymore, but it's something that it's allowed to be happening. It's allowed to be tolerated. So in this sense, you have a shift of the meaning. Yes. So we have these 6 theses. Like failures are not unintentional and anomalous events anymore. Crises are failures. Crisis exploitation is politics as usual. Black swans are waiting to happen. Combining failures may lead to success. And failure is not what is used to be anymore. So we have these ideas which appear in the social theory. And now I think this is, I would say that this is our starting point. So this is what is happening in the literature. And you see there is a connection here between the failure and the unintended, but failure is something different. So failure is much more like you don't act, you allow something to happen. It's much more like strategic ignorance. And also the unintended has also shifted. Yeah, so it's something that it's being contested all the time. So this would be the social theory. And now I would try to show what's happening with failure and unintended here. So now it's like it will be the part of the lecture that maybe you come here to listen. Yeah. So this is the now we are going to break this interaction between failure and the unintended in two parts: the failure and the unintended. So how does failure look like? So what I propose now, it's like, let's have a short, like a 3 minutes. I would like to present a trailer. So me and my colleagues, we made 3 movies. We think they present like interrelated issues. The first one is on failure. So I would like to present it because it will give you an idea of how we relate to failure, and then I will try to on this basis to go forward. So let me just present. I hope it will be visible. It's a very short. It's a very short movie. It has 3 minutes. You can also see my colleagues. So let's go.
What is failure? Failure is the opposite of success. Failure is when we miss a target, when we do not accomplish an intended objective, or when we fall short in our attempts and aspirations. On the other hand, failure is another term for hard work. Failure is an opportunity to learn. If we are lucky and stubborn enough, we're told, failure may even lead to success. Failure is the most universal and common experience of all. There is hardly anyone who has not experienced failure, or has not yet heard.
Excuse me, Mica. Sorry.
Yes.
We cannot see the clip actually.
You don't? I'm sorry. Let me change it.
Or maybe you can just put the link on the chat room. So we can help you screen it.
Wait, I will put it. Wait. Do you see now?
Yeah, we can see now.
Okay, I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But now we cannot hear the sound.
What is failure?
Yep.
It's okay?
Failure
It's
is the
good
opposite.
now.
Failure is when we miss a target, when we do not accomplish an intended objective, or when we fall short in our attempts and aspirations. On the other hand, failure is another term for hard work. Failure is an opportunity to learn. If we are lucky and stubborn enough, we're told, failure may even lead to success. Failure is the most universal and common experience of all. There is hardly anyone who has not experienced failure, who has not yet heard empowering formulas of failure leading to success. People think they know everything there is to know about failure, but do they? What does sociology say about failure? There are 3 issues that stand out. First, failure is a social process. Failure, as we know it, is a social phenomenon which is calculable and has evolved alongside with neoliberalism. Second, failure is linked with mainstream norms of success. We take for granted social expectations of productivity, heterosexuality, and able-bodiedness, but these are socially constructed. Third, we do not fail alone. In our experiences of failure, we act according to advices of failure experts that coach us how to transform failure in a story of success. Internet gurus, trainers, family peers, and even social scientists. The most important thing, however, is that failure can be redefined, reimagined, and reframed. Challenging failure goes hand in hand with the challenging of social norms of exclusion. Challenging failure is a tool of social emancipation.
What is our input to failure studies? As sociologists, we suggest that we need to be more critical about failure. We also need to be more reflexive about our own criticism. The main challenging issue are the norms of success, but we see that very important and pressing problem here is inequality. We all experience failure, but at the end of the day, in the stories of the failure, they are all contingent on class, gender, race, age, and neo-colonial relations in our society. Failure leads to success. Failure helps us to learn, but failure is also a privilege. As sociologists, we have the responsibility to test our interpretations and counter-narratives of failure against our empirical findings, opportunities, and resources.
Okay, so let me get back to the presentation. So this would be, I think, more or less what our team think. I mean, what is our view on failure? Yes. So I think I just wanted to offer like a more like a audio video for you to see the materiality of it. Yeah, so there were some ideas which came up, but let's look at them as a general framework for our discussion here. So now I will try to show you and to bring here what is the relevant literature on failure today and how we can approach it in relation with the unintended. So how does failure look like in social sciences? So you have various books, and there is, as I tried to announce it at the beginning of this lecture, that there is a proliferation of failure research. So now, for example, me and my colleagues, we have edited this Routledge International Handbook of Failure. This is an approach which looks, our approach is rather critical. So it looks at exercises of reinterpretation of failure in social theory, and we try to articulate that there is a field which is called critical failure studies. Then, for example, another author, I think you're familiar with, Ariuna Padurai and with Neta Alexander, they also published a book on failure two years ago, and they look at failure in the context of startups, a point of view from, for example, anthropology of technology. They link failure with financialization, and they, for example, notice that there is a process, that there is an acceleration of failures. So we have, and technology gives us this impression that these failures are very fragmented, that you can jump from one to another, and actually you are forgetting these failures. So they want to show that there is a meta failure occurring, which is much more like a state of forgetfulness, denial, a lot of failure experiences which are not taken into account. The failure of, for example, of men, there is a different reaction than, for example, to the failure of women. So a very an interesting approach, which is anthropological, but it links failure experiences, which idea of being forgotten and being denied access to some resources. And then, for example, another book from No Future, it's called from like also a critical approach, for example, from queer studies. It shows that there is a meta failure which is related to social groups who are considered to be non-productive in the society. For example, groups of disabled people. So because they are not mainstream in the sense that they do not appear as productive, they don't have a future. So in this sense, there is this failure of becoming. So they have like an arrested development. So they show that failure in this sense is not lack of success, but for example, the fact that you don't belong to the mainstream, and so you don't even have access to these mainstream experiences of failure. And then this is kind of literature that we have been engaging with. But there is, for example, another type of literature, which is a North American interpretation, which is coming, for example, from a quantification of the dynamics of failure in startups, in innovation, and in technology, which shows that actually, if you are quantifying and you look at social networks, you can discover what is the formula of success. For example, how many applications to receive an academic grant you have to make in order to be successful, and what is for example, the formula of being successful in science. They advance this idea that failure, it's not the lack of receiving a financial resource of funding, but failure occurs at the moment when scientists stop being productive. Yeah, that this is a lack of productivity and lack of trying is actually even worse than this experiencing episodic periods of not receiving. That if you are productive enough, and this is the formula, if you are productive enough and you are persistent enough, eventually you will succeed. So you have different approaches to failure, and sometimes in the North American tradition, it is an issue of success. So you say failure, and then you think, yes, failure can become a tool of success. In public policy, failure, it is an issue of learning. So are we learning from failures or not? In education, it is this phenomenon of failure deprivation that it was noticed that because of increased care on our children, that they become failure deprived. They don't have these experiences of failure at an early age, and later on they have problems of coping. So a lot is going on, and let's try to understand what are the main theoretical frameworks. What is the literature? What the literature seems to agree on is that there is no such thing as failure, but actually that we live in regimes of failure. And for example, in the neoliberal regime, in Poland, for example, we have a mix of neoliberalism and, let's say, post-communist transformation. But in the neoliberal regime of failure, it's an issue of power relations. So how you fail, it tells you, and how people react to your failure, whether you have a network of support, it's an issue of your power in the society. Just 1 minute. I'm sorry for this. I have been problems with my throat. So it's an element of power relations. Then it's also been shown that in the neoliberal regime of failure it's increasingly interpreted in terms of an element of market. You economize it. So you look at it, for example, as a cost. You lose something. It is all the time being calculated, and it's not a normative loss. It's not something at the level of values, but it is more. I'm sorry, just a minute. I'm sorry for this. We are all the time calculating our successes and failures, and actually lack, for example, of statistics, it's even a sign of lack of success. For example, during COVID-19, there was this obsession of calculating how many people are tested, how many people are not tested, and so the statistics were interpreted, but also the lack of statistics. For example, that you don't know how many people have the virus or they don't have the virus. This is even it's a sign of failure. It's also been shown that failure, it's a rhetoric of productivity. It means that what we consider like how we interpret failure, it's in relation with whether somebody is productive or not. And to be acknowledged as having lack of success, it means that you have to be productive. So social groups and people who are excluded because of various reasons, for example, being disabled, they are not productive. They even they have like non-conventional models of failure, and we have problems to integrate other models of failure. So our model of failure is of somebody who's trying a public policy. They try to act, they have some intentions, and something goes wrong. So this is our interpretation of failure, but it is at the meta level linked with productivity. So, for example, there is a difficulty in the society to understand what is failure, for example, for people who are not productive. Yes, so what is that? There is, for example, upward, downward mobility. So we think our idea of failure is, for example, it is positioned on a certain verticality, so you go down, and it's also linked with able-bodiedness. Yes, so it is in a way our image of failure. It is, for example, an allegory of people, for example, from middle class, who are all the time trying to be active. They are heterosexual. They have able-bodiedness. So there is 100% fitness and this intention of trying, and then you come out with lack of success, for example, unintended consequences, unintentional event. So this is the image of failure, which is linked with our neoliberal regime, and this is a certain meta discourse that various authors from social sciences have tried to identify. Okay. What about failure in our society? I think if we are because I will be identifying like 3 main analytical frameworks, just to give you a context. So how should we approach failure? As I made the point at the beginning of our presentation, there is a globalization of failure experiences. Yes. So, for example, if we are now we are making this research on technological failures in the context of COVID, and what is the public policy response in the pandemic and post-pandemic context in 8 countries. But it is not a problem, for example, to have like intercultural communication regarding the failures of COVID-19. So although the countries have different experiences, but there is a globalization of the crisis and of the failure experiences, which allows actually the social researchers to communicate and to bring together complementary and comparative research. So there is a globalization. There is also an acceleration in the sense that we are living in a context of acceleration of crisis. For example, not only in Poland, since 2015, we can identify certain major crises. For example, the European refugee crisis, the pandemic, the heated debates regarding to abortion, which created social mass protest movements in Poland. These episodes of refugee crisis, which are linked at the local level in Poland, for example, at the Poland-Belarus, the refugee border crisis. So, and now recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we are accustomed to a context of rapidly changing circumstances and of political crisis, which means that there is also a fragmentation of these failure experiences. So we are, as for example, at the level of lay people, you can, for example, hear that now, for example, people forgot about COVID because now it's we have to concentrate on another crisis. Which means that there is this element Apadura was showing, this idea of forgetfulness, that some crises and experiences are getting forgotten because you all the time you actually live in this context that you have to prepare for the next crisis. Yes. For example, now we are in this context of Russian invasion of Ukraine, but in the same time you are preparing for what might have happened, what might happen in Poland, this threat of the atomic bomb. Yes. So it's not we have the present crisis, are about the possibly elements of crisis that are related and we have to prepare for. And this, if you look at, you have 3 books here, which discuss episodes of crisis regarding neoliberalism or health issues at the global level, and they all have this idea of acceleration, which makes you think about the future of your society. And for example, Imagine Futures, which discusses crisis in the capitalist order, a book by Jens Becker, one of the main names from economic sociology, or Andrew Lakoff, who was looking at this issue of unpreparedness regarding global health emergencies, and he was even advancing this idea that now we live in a political context when we are all the time preparing. Yes, so this is a change of meaning, that failure, it's not lack of success. So it's not something you try to come up with and it went wrong, but it is in the future, and it's problematic that you don't prepare properly and what you should prepare for. And you have to exploit. We are exploiting all the time these future events in the sense that we are reacting to them. We try to prepare, and there is exploitation also in terms of rhetoric. So, but now, if you look at the literature on failure, and I think maybe this will be much more concrete for you. So, how do we understand failure now in social sciences? And I believe there are 3. I would say that there are 3 frameworks. So one, it's a framework which is related. It is a social theory, but it is informed by developments in policy studies, international relations. So they notice that failure, it's not lack of success, but it's that you are not prepared. Yes, so the problem is not that there were unintended outcomes, unexpected events, something went wrong. The whole idea that you didn't prepare, that you were ignoring some signals, this is the failure. And the question is then, it's not whether you learn from failure or not, but how you should prepare for failure in changing circumstances, how you should, what are the future failures that you should prepare for. In policy studies, it's also this idea that you have to improve the resilience of the system. So you respond to existing crises and unexpected events by developing public policy which can absorb future episodes of crisis, which is resilient and it's flexible. Because the situation is changing quite often. So even if you learn from past failures, but you have to develop solutions which are oriented towards the future and which are able to absorb future shocks. So the whole idea of failure is changing. It's about it's a lack of preparation. So it's not lack of success, it's lack of preparation. Then another meaning of failure, this is much more, it's coming from social theory, which is critical. For example, you have literature on globalization, Saskia Sassen, Apadorai, queer theory, disability studies, analysis of narratives from authors who are coming from arts and digital anthropology. So they show that failure, it's not lack of success. You have a whole area of people who are marginalized, who don't even get the chance to try to implement something. So so it's much more a state of being invisible, of being marginalized, that you are all the time excluded. So they show that, and the problem is that you have these inequalities of failure, or that some failures are much more visible, some failures are being forgotten. So it's your failure, for example, it's not acknowledged. So you are all the time like being marginalized. So it's like it's a new meaning of failure, but that you are being forgotten. Yes. So it's actually, this literature shows that this failure or this idea of unintended consequences in this neoliberal sense, it's actually something, a step forward. But the problem is that sometimes you're not even allowed, or you're not allowed to play the game. So in this sense, failure, it's a change of meaning, because it's something about social injustice, and it's about being neglected, so being ignored. And then you have the third, which is of course literature. It's about it's a North American approach. This is something you find in education studies, science studies, innovation, they have a much more pragmatic approach to failure. And here, failure is something that might lead to success. So it's not, it's something that it's made in the future. So it's not lack of success, but the idea is that the idea of the scientists is that they have to show that that at the level of society, there is potential to absorb much more failure. For example, the question is how many times you try to go for a job interview before resigning. And if at the level of the society you discover that people after 2 attempts or of grant application or of a startup, they give up, the job of the social scientist would be to show that they have to try more, they have to be more productive, they have to be patient, because in the end it will lead to success. So that they have to be more productive, to try even more, but to change a bit differently. What should they change? So the whole, it goes into the future. It's a potential tool of success. And they're not, they see the problem of inequality, that some sort of social groups may have a better relationship and a better start to cope with failure, but it is not the main concern. The idea is to make failure a tool of success. So you have these 3 perspectives. These are some of the, these are 3. So what kind of books you can expect? Yeah, so for example, if failure means lack of preparation, you will have these titles like Governing Failure, The Government of Emergency. And you see, you don't have the failure in the title. I mean, it's not sometimes like in The Government of Emergency, it is this convergence with the idea of the unintended and the unexpected. So you can see that the 2 rhetorics are quite close. When things don't fall apart, yes. So you can expect that everything is going on, but it still goes on because of the exploitation of the crisis. In the second framework, when failure is being this situation of injustice and of being neglected, now you have more like anthropological titles, and it's related to this idea of exclusion, like No Future, this book by Halberstam, also coming from queer theory, Queer Arts of Failure, which show that certain social groups, which we don't think that they are not mainstream, but they have their own types of failure, sometimes an understanding of failure which is something revolutionary. Yeah, so it's a literature on failure which shows not only this like marginalization, but also that there are attempts to reimagine what failure is, and this might lead to social emancipation. And then in this literature where the failure is a tool of success, which is usually it's concentrated on science, they show how actually in science, for example, or in innovation, failure might lead to a surprise, to serendipity, that failure in science is something it's a resource of action, it might have a positive outcome. So you have titles which are much more pragmatic, and you can see this idea of quantification. So ignorance and surprise, the science of science, the formula. So all these books that I put here on the site are regard to failure, but then we have to know how to locate them and what is the discourse beyond them. What does the literature on failure do? So on the other one hand, they show what is going on in the reality. So they bring this new understanding of failure, but they also have like a sort of imperative or a social manifesto. For example, in this literature in public policy, international relations, which might be close to this functionalist thinking in sociology, and I think this is the most unintended theory, is that you prepare, it's not an issue of coping with failure, but you have to design failure, you have to plan failure. Yes, so you have to plan failure in advance. This would be what you have to do. In this literature, which is showing that failure, it's actually today the state of being ignored and of being neglected. The idea of the social theory is that we have to reimagine, we have to be critical about the norms of success and failure in our society, and we have to bring alternatives. So we'll have a lot, you will see a lot of articles and papers and books which talk about reimagining and the idea of that there is in the capitalist dynamics, there is a problem of our imaginary, that these imagined futures, they have to be reinvented. So all this idea of reimagination, utopia, dystopia, so these kind of formulas. But in this literature, this third analytical framework on whether failure might lead to success or not, then you have to normalize failure. You have to embrace it, to control it, and to be more pragmatic. So it's a different kind of idea beyond the social theory. So how you can increase, how you can have better skills of how to do with failure, how you can control it better, how you should be more patient. Yes. So what is the meaning of failure? So in the everywhere you can see it's this idea of the future. So in the first perspective, when failure is about lack of preparation, then failure is the future event. For example, in the COVID context, we were wondering, what is the next wave? When it will be the next wave? What will happen next? Now, so it's the failure is the future event. It's not something that went wrong. It had unintended consequences, but it's the future event that you have to plan. In the second approach, failure, it's a condition of invisibility. So you have to be very critical and to notice that the way your failure is defined or it's not acknowledged, it shows what is your position in the power relations in the society. So the more your failure is acknowledged and the more you have a social network, the more you have a dominant position. And in the third one, it is a potential tool. So it is a future, but it's more about creating possibilities. So you create possibilities of failure turning into success. So you can see the shift. It's more into the future. So it's more about what you have to do and what you are supposed to do and how you should become more involved with your failure. Now, what we are doing, this is our research on, this is something I told you already, and now here it's this element when I will give you some illustrations. Then the idea is that failure, it's a resource. So you change the understanding. It's not lack of success. It's not something that has unintended consequences, but it's something that might help you to improve your social position or to exploit the crisis. And we made, upon our research on these three public policies in Poland, we noticed that the way failure appears as a resource in the society and in public policy and political action, you might identify four possibilities. So one is the crisis exploitation, when you directly exploit situations of unexpected events, crisis and unintended in public policy. Yeah, so you exploit them. You have rhetorically, financially, you exploit them, you exploit the uncertainty, so you just exploit them. The other element, the other context in which failure occurs as a resource is you have this idea, maybe you're familiar with, of strategic ignorance. You should be, because this is something related to functionalist ignorance. Strategic ignorance was first introduced by Merton. So it's a state at the level of the society when you ignore that something is going on, but people don't draw attention to it. So they are not critical about it. It's now there is another term in organizational studies, organizational stupidity. It's a harsh term, but it's this idea that you lack reflexivity. So you allow banalization of failure. You allow some failures to happen. Either you ignore them, or it is an effect of what is going on in the society. The other way in which failure is exploited is that you might reinterpret the statistics and, for example, say that failure is actually a success. You can you have this idea of economic cleansing, that you don't, for example, you take only the GDP into account, but you marginalize other indicators of social inequality in the society, that you look at failure of certain people, but you marginalize other experiences. So it's another sense in which failure might act as a resource. And then the fourth one is a much more positive one. When failure is used, for example, in arts or in critical social theory to address these norms of success that are problematic in the society. So I will show you some illustrations. I think that might be interesting for you. So this crisis exploitation term, it was introduced by in 2010 by 3 authors from public policy. But there was a resurrection of the concept, and it is frequently being used in articles which are looking, for example, also on how COVID-19 was managed at local or at a global level. And this idea of that the COVID was exploited for political use or for advancing some regulatory measures, for example, it's quite often taken up in relation with how the crisis was managed in Israel, that after a short period of lack of control and uncertainty in Israel, it was introduced a very concrete and very, I would say, regime of coping with COVID that was related with surveillance. So you have critical, for example, articles in the media and in social sciences showing that this might be an element of political exploitation of the crisis. I will just give you some titles. I mean, we are not going to debate whether it was this situation or not. The idea is that just to show that you have, there is literature which is dealing with the crisis exploitation. So critics in Israel say Netanyahu using coronavirus as pretext for massive power grab. Some papers are much more scientific. Some are much more like press releases. It was considered also in relation to. It was noticed that at the global level, various changes have been introduced in relation to access to abortion, sometimes much more restrictive, and in case of Poland, sometimes in the sense of liberalization. But the idea, it's also in some articles discussed whether what is happening. Is this an instrumentalization of a crisis of context, and when you take advantage to introduce some measures, or it's just a situation that we anyway live in a context of crisis, and the legislative process is just going on, and it is actually an interconnection. So you have a problematization, yes, how, but you see, the crisis, COVID, appears as a resource of exploitation, in the sense that something is going on. You introduce some measures, some regulatory measures, or you use, so there is the power relations are getting more oppressive or not. So in this sense, it is a clear resource. So another example, you find there is a lot of discussion about ignorance in relation to COVID. For example, you can see that the lay, so people, for example, are not wearing masks because they are stupid, or people are overreacting to COVID because they are ignorant. So people don't read, people are manipulated by experts. So one way or the other, this issue of ignorance occurs as an element that is the resource of, for example, of the proliferation of crisis, or ignorance. It's just a way, for example, of coping with the crisis. So there are two terms. I also already mentioned them, but you can see here what is the theoretical inspiration. So strategic ignorance, as I said, it's actually, it's when you ignore something that you already know. Yes. So, for example, you know that you should be wearing a mask, but you just, you know what could have been the consequences for the other people, but for one reason or the other, you just ignore it. Or the idea of functional stupidity, which is a much more recent term, it was advanced in organizational studies, that you react in a way that it's stupid, or it's unreflexive. So both these ideas of ignorance, strategic ignorance, and functional stupidity appears, and it is a contestation of how the crisis is coped with in the context of COVID. Yes, so you also can find. So it's not a direct exploitation of the crisis of COVID, but it is, it's more like you don't act. So this would be, so the exploitation, the failure occurs as a resource, in the sense that it allows certain groups of people not to act, not to interfere. So the exploitation is not in proactive behavior, but in ignoring some blueprints, ignoring the advice of the expert, bagatellization. So it's a resource, but in the sense that of non-action. But we know from social theory that non-action is also action, and it's sometimes non-action. It's even more problematic. Yes, ignorance. It's also been studied in relation with this contestation of expert knowledge on COVID. All these contestations regarding the vaccines, the distribution. So it's all related to ignorance, the vaccine hesitancy, the phenomenon. It's also about ignorance, or strategic ignorance helps to understand vaccine hesitancy in the context of COVID. But here, as I said, so vaccine hesitancy, it's like the resource, it's in that you don't act, or you postpone. The population is postponing the response. It's not acting, and this is problematic in the context of a crisis. So a resource of action, but it's a bit different. And now one of my favorite terms is that failure might act as resource because it might lead to invisibilization. For this term was, but it does not appear only here. So it was launched by Saskia Sassen. She's one of the first authors who draw attention. So crisis and failures render that some people are getting more invisible, but also that it might increase the visibility of certain groups of people. So she's saying, I use this term to describe measures and indicators that fail to gauge losses, whether intentionally or not, such as the purposeful construction of measures that do away with the negatives. Conceptual invisibility calls for people, places, failed small businesses, neighborhoods destroyed by hurricanes, and neighborhoods destroyed by mortgage foreclosures, as well as land and water destroyed by our industrial practices. So situations of crisis increase their resource because they might increase the visibility or invisibility of certain problems in the society. It was shown, for example, that, and you are probably familiar with that, there was a battle of which indicators to take into account, whether to establish the success or failure of coping with COVID, and which indicators should not be taken into account. And this is a fight at the technological and also at the political level. But in this sense, the crisis acts as a resource because it allows to play on this invisibilization and visibility. And this might be interesting, I hope. The fourth way in which failure might act as a resource of action and of public policy is that every episode of crisis allows, in a way, to reinterpret, to change what we mean by unexpected, by unintentional, by failure. For example, COVID brought some new modalities of thinking about failure. One of the ideas is that it's not lack of success anymore, but it's lack of preparation. The second one is flattering the curve, in the sense that successful coping with COVID is not so much that you have to deal with the problem directly, but you just have to, so in time, you have to make sure that the impact of the crisis is evenly distributed. So that flattening the curve. So you don't expect that the policy response will act instantly, but for example, you have to make sure that the crisis will have an impact that can be absorbed at the level of the society. So it's also a change because you have to make the system to be much more flexible and resilient to various types of crisis. So in this sense, it does not react 100% and very quickly to each crisis, but it has the possibility to absorb shocks and episodes of crisis. But it also brought, for example, it made the essential workers, probably are familiar with this in Indonesia, much more visible at the level of the society. So the essential workers which were initially marginalized, now they increased much more visibility, and we realized that coping with the crisis is not only an element of elite response, but it's also of maintenance, and what is to what extent essential groups in the society are taken care of. So it changed the perception. So it brings new arts of failure and reimagination. So in this sense, it acts as a resource. For example, in the business sector, you have new models of failure, a shift in the redefining of meaning. So every episode of crisis allows you to reinterpret how you should react, how you are supposed to react. Yes, so this made us, and we are now going in the direction of the unintended. So we have to see that failure, it's not about lack of success, but it's about exploitation, invisibilization, future projection, and it's about power and discipline in the society. And actually, the more you have in public policy, you have to make the failures visible, you have to project them, you have to plan them, and in this sense, they work as a resource of public policy. So you, in the context of crisis, you have to exploit the crisis in the sense of taking care that your failure is being noticed and it's being acknowledged. The social actors who don't have the skills to react to their failures and to make them public and to attract networks of support for future failures are the ones who are in a position of being ignored and being marginalized. And this is the evolution that is visible in public policies. And so in this sense, failure, because it's an element that you have to plan, it becomes a source of dynamism and of coordination. And the problem is that when you are ignored and you are not allowed to fail. Now, what about the unintended? So we saw that this there is this the failure and how we problematize it has changed. And now we go to the second element, which is the unintended. I have here a picture with Dr. Supraja also like in the middle. So we've been working on unintended for 10 years, and we've been having a series of unintended consequences workshops. Now this our engagement in the unintended changed a bit, because it's now we study more the unintended as unexpected in the context of failure regimes. But our university was directly linked with the idea of the unintended, but it had to change. And now I will show you why and what is happening in social theory. And this is a much more shorter part, and then we will draw the conclusions. So what we noticed. So what this discussion of failure allowed us to observe. So as I said, that failure is more than unintentional events. So it's something you prepare for, you exploit. And but in the unintended, we also notice a change. For example, the unintended, if you're looking now for literature of unintended consequences, it will be quite difficult for you to find. So in social theory, the discussions about unintended consequences as unintended consequences, I think it stops with the functionalist turn. After the functionalist theory, which is like in the 80s, it stopped being mainstream. The unintended, it's much more about unexpectedness, about unanticipated, about tolerating some outcomes that you anticipate might happen. So it's much more about being unprepared. So in the unintended, and how it is discussed, we also notice this shift of meaning in the direction of being unprepared, or you allow something to happen that you have predicted, or which might have been predicted. And this is why, because, for example, when I wrote the book on unintended consequences, I noticed that if we are just write unintended consequences, I will not find something very relevant in Google Scholar. So there will be some papers, but I had this feeling that the unintended is somewhere else. And indeed, the unintended, you find it in the literature on risks, on accidents, on dangers, on ignorance. This is where the unintended is now located in social theory. It's an interesting evolution, but it is interesting that some authors have also been showing that the meaning of the unintended has been changing. So let me show you the first one of the first authors who draw attention that the unintended as a sociological idea, it's very unstable. For example, Hirschman, who is one of the, Albert Hirschman, he's a known social scientist, but he's coming from public theory, policy making theory and development projects. So he wrote several books that are linked with this idea of unintended consequences and failures. One of them is Rhetoric of Reaction, where he's looking that you can block. So for example, if somebody wants to implement a project, you can block it by saying that it will lead to unintended consequences and perverse effects. And in this sense, he was looking at this rhetoric of reaction. So you use the unintended consequences idea in order to block people from action, but you say that it will lead to perverse effects. And he was showing, but by looking also like this idea of invisible hand by Adam Smith, that there is a tendency when you say unintended to make it more like a perverse effect, that acting with good intentions because of some dialectical mechanism will lead to undesirable and perverse effects, and it will lead even to the contrary of what you intended. So there is this this shift of meaning. So you change from the unintended to the perverse effect and the undesirable. Then in the social sciences, it was shown that Robert Merton initially published an article in 1936, which is called The Unanticipated Consequences of Social Action. But because of the functionalist turn in the sense of looking at manifest and latent consequences of your action, the unanticipated in social theory began to be discussed in terms of unintended. So in the 50s, the unanticipated from the 30s changes to the unintended. And in our book, in my book, which was published a few years back, I noticed that now, so what was the unintended in the 50s? Now it's more about something that is unexpected and something that, for example, that the Svart, Frank de Svart, he's showing that it's much more about effects that could have been anticipated but were ignored. If you looking in terms of, for example, you have here a graph. It shows a social graphical representation of how many times the social scientists refrained from using the word unanticipated and they use the word unintended. Yeah, so it shows that there is a proliferation of the vocabulary of the unintended in the 50s, but now the tendency is to use unexpected surprise. This happened in, I think, like 20 years ago. And now it's much more about this idea of preparedness and being unprepared. And also there is a shift that the unanticipated comes back, but in the idea that it's not something unanticipated, but it's something that could have been anticipated, but it's been ignored. So all these discussions of Merton regarding the ignorance and ignorance as a resource of unintended consequences now comes back, but it's not an error or judgment, it's much more like a strategic ignorance that you allow at the level of the society. So let's have, it changes. So it's much more about what could have been, what was strategically being ignored, that the outcomes might have been differently, that we could have been prepared. So in this sense, you can find the unintended in social theory. So I think I will need, I would just like to show you one more short film regarding the ignorance and how this is being theoretized in the society. So you can see that ignorance is the new unintended in social theory. So it's not about something that it's unintended, but something that it's been ignored. Strategically, it's being ignored. So let me just pull you. Do I have 10 more minutes?
Yep, you have 10 more minutes, Mica. It's okay.
Okay, so let me have this because I think it's interesting, and then I will finish. Okay, share screen. It's visible? It's visible? Yes.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. It's visible.
Okay.
But the sound maybe?
What is ignorance? Ignorance is when we do not know something. Ignorance is lack of information. But ignorance is also when we refuse to learn or we do not have access to education. This might happen because of race, gender, age, ethnic bias in our society, or other aspects regarding inequality. Today, in the context of unexpected events and crises, ignorance is brought into spotlight. What does it mean? The 2008 economic crisis made everyone ask, why didn't economists and politicians anticipate the crisis? The 2015 refugee crisis, on the other hand, pointed to high levels of strategic ignorance regarding the refugee situation worldwide. Ignorance was revealed as indifference, marginalization, stigma, denial, and even neglect. The COVID pandemic most recently indicated the social costs of perceived ignorance. Ignorance was paraded as indifference, misrepresentation, and even problematic scientific knowledge. Today, ignorance is the main tool for challenging scientific expertise and taking issue with asymmetries of power in our society. What do sociologists say about ignorance? To understand ignorance, new areas of social sciences developed. They are ignorance studies, new sociology of ignorance, and agnotology. These fields started a conceptual revolution in relation to ignorance. They see ignorance not only as the lack of knowledge, but also as a resource for action that is employed strategically. For them, ignorance is not a problem, it is an opportunity. Ignorance is power. Paradoxically, ignorance doesn't really change. Our reliance on ignorance in how we think and how we act is difficult to alter. Knowledge doesn't simply diminish ignorance. The more we know, the more we don't know.
What is our input to ignorance studies? We contribute to ignorance studies in three ways. First, we want to move it to the next level. Recently, ignorance studies focus mostly on what ignorance is. We want to study what ignorance does, how it interacts with other social processes. Second, we are interested in interaction of ignorance and anticipation, how politicians project future and how they make us to ignore the possible future scenarios. And the third, we observe that the ignorance is always there, it doesn't change. But we still can challenge our biases to our knowledge and our ignorance. We have to do it by challenging the imagination about the future. So our main claim is that in order to change ignorance, you need to change the future.
Okay, so at this, it's a short, very short introduction to the topic of ignorance, but what I wanted to show is that there is a shift, yeah, from the problem of lack of like this unintentionality to this idea of ignored predictability. Yeah, so or you ignore to prepare, you don't take action. So this is how we should how the unintended is being problematized now in social sciences. So, and it's not only about ignorance, but as I said, it is about the future. Okay, I'm sorry, just one second. So this shift of meaning, so from not something unintended, something that could have been predicted. Yeah, so this could have been predicted. It shows that the future might be different. You should prepare, and it's also that it's about power relations. So who is refraining from action and who doesn't. So it's a very interesting shift, but it has this idea that failures and crises, they might be designed, might be planned. So we might design. We cannot avoid the failures and the crises and the unintended consequences, but we might design the public policy in a way that it has a way of responding to crisis that it's much more egalitarian, that is much more integrative and inclusive inclusive, that it does not lead to, it does not increase its invisibilization, but that we take care of statistics to represent, we acknowledge failures of social groups who usually are marginalized. So the idea is that to design failures and unintended unexpected events, but to make the system much more integrative, yes, to make this culture of failure to be much more, I would say, much more friendlier, yes, to make it less less oppressive. So the failure and the unintended become forms of anticipation of future crises. So it's about the future, what could have been, and what you should do. What is the challenge? The challenge is that if we shift towards the future, so we place the failure and it's something that we should prepare for, that could have been anticipated, that there is a lot that is being forgotten because of this acceleration and orientation towards the future. And this is this idea of that it might lead to some sort of amnesia. Yes, also this idea of learning from failures and learning from unintended outcomes. Now it's much more about how you should prepare for, how you should calculate, how you should evaluate. So the focus is not so much on learning, but on how you represent these issues better statistically. So there is a change at the level of practices of public policy. You don't learn from failure, but now you have to use failures in order to advance policy making. And the issue of learning, it's somehow it's not so visible anymore. And the challenge for social sciences is to bring this to make this a lot of what is forgotten, to make it more visible, to draw attention to what is invisibilized, marginalized, and denied when coping with contemporary crises and unintended outcomes. And I will leave you with this reflection from Appadurai that looks at failure actually as a mechanism of denial, mechanism of control. So it's not lack of success, but it's a completely different story. So this would be it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry I had problems with my throat. I could not anticipate that in which direction is it going. But thank you very much for your patience, and I hope it was useful. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Mica, for the very, very engaging and intriguing lecture. I don't have any intention to wrap it up or to restate what you have put forward very eloquently. I just want to invite participants to reflect the changing meaning of failure and unintended into Indonesian context. We have this very terrible COVID handling in the beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of other issues that have been of concern in Indonesia. We might be that we can be reflect upon what Mica has just put forward very clearly. So actually, I have some points that I personally am interested, but I think I will elaborate it after Dr. Muhammad Supraja, Mas Praja, deliver his lecture. But thank you so much, Mica, for the very, very intriguing lecture. Mas Praja, screen and time yours now.
Okay. What about my voice? Very clear or not?
Very clear, Mas Praja.
Okay. I think one of the important requirements to overcome the problem of failure is democratic situation, democratic culture. But I think I don't want to explore this themes, this issue, but I still want to make some notes because of my position as a lecturer of social theory, lecturer of social theories. I give a lecture of methodology, lecture of modern sociology, and I try to make connection what Mica explained with the theories issue. Even Mica has stated that the definition of valor now shifting or turn into the new ones. But at least maybe I still have four notes here related to failure and unintended consequences. First, as a concept and also theory, we seldom or even never using them to explain or understanding problem or issue within society directly. Although we know that many social phenomena actually view or describe about failure or unintended consequences happen surrounding our life. This is the first idea that I think. Yeah. The second, both of the concept, both of them usually can be used maybe almost in all paradigm in social theories, like structural functional, which can define failure or unintended consequences as they want, as structural functionalist theories wants, or maybe conflict theory, which define failure with if elements of society always agree with every public policy authorized or produced by the government. Or according to phenomenology, failure or unintended consequences means if agents, it can be individual or organization, has no succeed to achieve his or their goal. So I conclude that both of the concepts are neutral. Yeah, means concept of failure and unintended consequences for me are neutral. Yeah, it's neutral. So it's depend on how we define the situation based on our paradigms. Yeah. And so failure or unintended consequences means if agent has no succeed to achieve his or their goal. So I conclude that both of the concepts are neutral. So how do you respond about this, Mica? How do you respond about this? Yeah. And the third, what I want to note, or as a theory of paradigm, failures and unintended consequences only focus or limit their study related to crisis, abnormality in every social and cultural problems, in my mind. It is true or not, I think we need to discuss this. But I observe that the phenomenon, what you say, what you explain, is what I conclude. So this discourse, yeah, valor and unintended only relate with scope, yeah, only relate with scope, not more than that. Yeah, it is right or false. Yeah. And the fourth, yeah, I think this is the end of my notes. And I think because of my position as a lecturer who give explanation about social theories, I need to confirm with you about this. As you mentioned in your book, yeah, entitled Sociology as Analysis of the Unintended, this idea origins from Robert Merton. We know that Merton is a sociologist who became follower of Talcott Parsons. We know that Parsons is the important figure who develops functionalist theory. If I'm not mistaken, although Merton rather has a little different with Parsons, especially when he tried to introduce the concept of latent function and manifest function, as you said, of social institution. Like police institution, for example, has obligation to protect society from many kind of criminals, deeds. Yeah? But in other side, we often see that many policies monopolize many police to be criminalists. Like in Indonesia now, we have big cases. Yeah, now still in the courtroom, there is a police to do criminals with his junior, and he killed his junior. And this is the problem. Yeah. So what is the difference between Merton and functionalists and your paradigm? Yeah, because we cannot use all the paradigm at the same time to explain, to understand, to clarify the situation. That fourth question, which I note for our discussion, Mica, maybe you can respond it. Beside maybe my college, my student, maybe want to give you some question too. But from me, I have at least 4 notes. Okay, that's all, Mica.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Supraja, Mas Praja. Thanks for the 4 points to respond what Mica has put forward in the lecture. Mica, do you have all the 4 points and do you want to directly respond it?
Okay, thank you very much for this. I'm not sure about the because I think I was still in my mind yeah, I think I got the 4 points. I think there are 3 in my notes, but what is the first one before the issue of neutrality?
The 4th one, Dr. Muhammad Supraja. Yeah. Oh, the third. The third. The first. The first. It seems that we haven't used these concepts quite rigidly to reflect on society. How is it and why is it? I think was that your point?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you.
Yes,
I just wanted to make it clear. So should I respond now?
Yep. I think you can respond now, and then we can jump to the participants' questions.
Yes. So I think that these evolutions that I've been articulating here, I think that it might be that because I'm coming from economic sociology, where is a discussion about uncertainty, the future. So there is a lot of discussion. So maybe in this sense, this is why maybe we see that even failure and the unintended, it's more about the future and ignorance. So it might be that to use this idea of neutrality from Dr. Supraja, yeah, it might be that in other for example, network theory, which is interested in failure and success, they look at this much more neutral, so much more pragmatic. And indeed, for example, functionalist theory, which is quite close to public policy, they also, I think, look at failure and unintended in much more neutral terms. But the more you go in the direction of sociology, which is critical, and for example, American sociology is also critical because they look at these issues of social stratification, then it's not neutral anymore, because in this like a critical reading, nothing is neutral. So you always look for, even though you might overinterpret social reality and maybe you are not so objective anymore. Yeah, so I think that there is, if you look from the perspective of a crisis, there is this evolution, but it depends on the social paradigm. In innovation studies, I think it's much more neutral. Failure and the unintended, it's much more neutral. So it does not have, it's not related to power. And this is why I think now, for example, in economic sociology, Merton is very fashionable because of this idea of ignorance, anomy, yes. But now it's like it's a Merton without the functionalist tradition. So if you look at how authors from economic sociology like Alejandro Portes or Vivian Zelizer, Caruter, so there is they come back to Merton, but they don't look. It's the Merton before functionalism. So it's the Merton who was interested in unanticipated consequences in ignorance, but they don't look at the functionalist episode. And I think because functionalism allows you to discuss this idea of the unintended, but in a way that it's not about power, it's not about invisibility, but it's more about like in neutral terms. But now there is an interest, but it's more in Merton and it's not in functionalism. Even though I think that we are all the time functionalist, but because it's not a mainstream theory anymore, and because it was in Europe, it was very much contested by Giddens. So and also functionalist, it was this problem that the unintended was always there. So it was assumed that there will always be this dialectical term that it will always have unintended consequences. And we want to show now that yes, it has unintended outcomes, but these outcomes might be exploited. It's not so deterministic. Sometimes it's a dark side to this unintended. There is exploitation, there is strategic ignorance. And functionalist does not allow, I think, for these gray situations of this dark side. It's functionalism, I think it's much more straightforward. That you do something, it leads to manifest and latent functions, but it's very straightforward. It does not allow you to all these nuances. So Merton before functionalism, I think it's much more appropriate for what is going on in social theory today. I think I answered the four questions.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mica. Mas Praja, do you want to respond back to Mica's response?
Yeah, Mica, I still don't understand about the issue of paradigm related with the failure and unintended consequences as new meanings. Yeah, as you say that there are several sentences that very nice to sit it, like failure is a self process, and we have to reinterpretation the situation is very important now, because sometime we don't we tend to receive everything without critical. yeah, not reflexive. And so you suggest us to be more reflexive, because it is very important to face the crisis. But still, in my mind, is there a specific paradigm or theory that we can use to explain or to find solution of the problem in society? Because in my mind, if we have freedom to use whatever theory, this concept can be neutral. So I think maybe, I don't know, it is my suggestion, or maybe you have to think again about this concept. It is very important to refer what kind of theory that's very close or very nice, yeah, to explain, yeah, the situation with this new paradigm. When you try to redefine the concept of failure and unintended consequences, yeah. Or maybe it is about the phenomenology, maybe more appropriate, or maybe critical theory, more appropriate, or maybe postmodern school of thought is maybe appropriate. I think Merton is critical when he talk about a latent function. Yeah, we know that the latent function, many people usually don't refer, yeah, about that situation behind the scene, behind the reality. Like what I give you some example, what happened in our country now about the police, but the police institution who has desk or has obligation to protect the society from many kind of criminals. But we know that in fact we find many police do the victim, many police do criminals. So this is the latence, yeah, that we have to know behind the scene. So this is a kind of crisis. This is a kind of abnormality. So in my mind, maybe it is very important to refer or maybe, yeah, a paradigm who very close to your goal, Mica. Maybe you have some suggestion, or maybe you have idea about that theory, especially in sociology, yeah, Mica? Thank you, Mica.
Yes,
please.
thank you very much. So I would like just to say that I did not, so this, because I brought ignorance in, it's not, I was not intending to suggest that you are not critical. So it's not, I was just intending to show that in social theory, there is a problematization of this strategic ignorance in how we cope with crisis. So it's not my idea. It's just that it comes out. Ignorance is one of the main things that crises are associated with. Yes, either in the form of you neglect something or you don't understand something, but ignorance, it's always there. In terms of social theory, I build on economic sociology. I think this would be the paradigm, but this new economic sociology, which is a kind of social theory that the idea is that we look at, for example, unintended failures, but in this context of this neoliberal regimes. Yes, for example, this is what economic sociology does. It shows that the way we understand social processes, it comes with the culture, with this neoliberal culture. Now, of course, Poland is it's not a neoliberal culture. It's more like a neoliberalism and post-communist transformation. And then it's even interesting that the way we understand what is failure, what is the unintended, it is because we are part of this broader hybrid regime and the way we think about the market, that it's 100% market, or it has some element of hierarchy in it. So, and this economic system also influences the way we think about failures, the way that we always calculate them, that we measure them, and also what we think that it's related to productivity. So in this sense, I'm using economic sociology, but economic sociology is also a theory that shows that everything we do now, it has this element of the future. So they are critical about this orientation towards the future, but they say that, for example, if you look at how it's discussed, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that it is about the future. You don't explain it, but what you can learn from it. But it is, you discuss about the crisis in terms of how you should prepare for possible evolutions. What will be the next evolution? Who was, so in this sense, it's economic sociology, that it shows that all these processes are calculated, that we think it's this influence of financialization, but that also it's about the future and it's about preparation. There is, you don't really use in common language now this idea of unintended outcome. So you changed it. It's something you did not prepare for, but it's unintended in this regime that we're now living. It's changed its meaning. So we define it differently, even though we have it. Can you think of some unintended outcomes in relation with the public response to COVID or to criminal situations? It's not about the unintended anymore. It's something else, that it's more about what politicians don't say that it's going on. It's a lot of discussion about failure, but the unintended disappeared from the public discourse. Because the problem, for example, with COVID was that we are preparing what we are not preparing. It was not that what we are doing has unintended outcomes. So in this sense, and this is influenced because we are at a certain, it's influenced how we think about failures and the unintended. It's also influenced by the society we live in.
Okay, Mica. Okay, Ragil, maybe our audience, maybe.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mica and Mas Praja,
Thank you,
for
Mica.
interesting discussion that you two put forward. Okay, Mica, actually we already have three participants. They already wrote the questions on the chat room. First one is from Ali Dayat, second one from Tri Muriani, and the third one from Nuruddin. Do you guys want to put forward your question directly to Prof. Mica? If yes, please, Ali Dayat, you can go forward with your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mica or Ibu Mica, and thank you for Mas Praja dan Bung Ragil. From the discuss, I have three questions. And first, what is the difference between the concept of unintended and the concept of risk? Is risk something that is predictable? How to say, bisa terprediksi. Kemudian, while unintended is something that is not predictable in advance. And the twice, how does the perspective on failure that your study relate to early backs risk society perspective? How don't you consider early back, or how does the perspective of risk society research in your considerance? And the third, In the perspective of reflective modernity from Giddens or Anthony Giddens, failure is a lesson for us, so that we have preparedness with uncertainty in the future. What do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Mica, Ali is one of our graduate students. And do you got all of his 3 questions, or do you need some confirmation?
Thank you very much for these questions. So I think I can answer now. So maybe a bit of I think of contextualization. What is the relation? What is risk theory? What has risk theory? Is the connection with the unintended? So this is my perspective. But so I think that risk theory brought it somehow, I think, replaced the unintended consequences in social theory. So the risk theory, I think the book by Ulrich Beth came out in '86, and it came. I don't know if the other students are familiar with. So let's make just a short histories, and then it became an instant bestseller. So the risk theory, and you had all this discussion about risk, and it reformulated. So it was not anymore about the unintended consequences, but it was the risk society. And the risk society, partly it's Ulrich Beck, but it's also a lot of Anthony Giddens. But Anthony Giddens, if you look at his input to unintended theory before the risk society paradigm, you see that he was a very active discussant of this idea of unintended consequences in Merton. So, for example, he agreed with the idea of unintended consequences, but he was skeptical about this functionalist turn in Merton. He was very critical about how the functionalist theory approaches the idea of unintended consequences. And Giddens also introduced this idea that you have unintended consequences which happen in the society. So this idea of structuration, it was also an unintended outcome. So the fact that, for example, when you there is an unintended outcome in the sense that whatever you are doing, you are somehow reproducing the social order in the society, and this is like a global, a macro unintended outcome of the intentions. So this theory of structuration was a theory of unintended outcomes. And then you have all these evolutions in unintended theory which come against the functionalist perspective. This is what happens in the 80s. And now you have the risk theory, which I think it brings a break in the unintended theory, because at some point, all these debates regarding the functionalists just stop, and everybody is using the idea of risk society, which also is in synergy with this literature on accidents, on dangers, banalization of deviance. So it is in synergy with risk theory, which is what is going on in science and technology studies. But for the development of thinking about the unintended, it brought a break, because unintended theory became much more abstract, also because of game theory. And then you have this best-selling book on risk theory, which somehow it is related to what they are intended, but it's outside of it, because it talks about something different. But you see, the risk theory is also about the future, because the risks are broader dangers which are invisible to the society, which are the outcome of modernization. And the risk is something which is not visible, but it at some point is made visible. Like, I don't know, the SARS was invisible, for example, the virus, but at some point, because of the threshold, the number of cases, it became like a risk to the society, which is acknowledged. But the risk, it is a concept which brings this idea of future, something which is not visible, but might become visible. And it's a matter of time because of these effects of modernization. And it also brought this idea of ignorance, that we have to be much more reflexive So it's not and we have to know how to react. So the risk society in already has these ideas of possible future, visibility, invisibility, materialization, what you ignore in it. So you can see this evolution towards the future, the probable future, and the possibilities. What now it's even more visible. So I think this is the connection. I'm not. I was not referring to risk theory for two reasons. One, although in the book I have a chapter on it, because I think it is something about the unintended, but actually it's outside the idea of the unintended consequences. So even though Giddens it's concerned with the unintended, but risk society it's something different. So it's not something in society that you connect with the idea of unintended consequences. It has its own evolution. The second is that now we go out of the risk paradigm. I think this was a framework for the 80s, for the 90s, but now it's much more about the crisis and failures. So we have the, even on COVID, you have some articles that use the Ulrich Beck idea more about world risk society. So it's not the risk society anymore, but it's world risk society. But the literature which looks at ignorance, failure, crisis, this is the mainstream now. It's not the risk vocabulary. It's a fatigue with the idea of risk because it was very used in the 90s and at the beginning of the century. So now it's more about preparation, and the preparation is the and the next emergency. So you see risk, emergencies are a way of risks, but it's something different. So it's much more about emergency and not about risks today. What other question?
Okay, thank you, Mica. The second question, I think you have already touched it, because the question is also related to what Anthony Giddens' concept of agent and structures relation. So I think you have already touched it and you have already explained it. Do you agree, Tri? Do you get?
Yes, thank you,
Yeah.
Mas Rakil and Dr. Mica. Thank you for the answer.
Okay, so
Yeah,
we can now move to this third question from Nuruddin. He cannot go forward with the question because his signal is not quite good. The question is, can you explain how Russia's failure to capture Ukraine can be read from this perspective of failure and unintended?
Okay, so thank you very much. So I'm not dealing with the Russian invasion on Ukraine. So I'm not prepared to give like an answer which is based on empirical explorations. But let me just maybe some insights. So it is a language of failure because, for example, if you look, very often it was used this idea of strategic failure by Putin. So the fact that it was a miscalculation, so that they didn't they didn't anticipate what will be the reaction of Ukraine. They didn't anticipate what will be the support at the level of Europe. So all these elements that this failed anticipation, this strategic failure. So it is a discourse of failure. So in this sense, it would be the first framework. So they prepared, but they were not. It's not about lack of preparation, but lack of anticipation. Yes. So this strategic failure, and then of course with the development of the crisis, you also have the type of failure it's changing. Yes. So the type of failure is changing. For the European Union, we were not prepared. For the invasion that the Russian invasion came as a surprise or not. This is also something that is debated. Yes, but it was a lack of, I wouldn't say of preparation, but that the European leaders did not. They ignored the signals which were all the time given by Ukraine that the Russian invasion is very it will take place. So it is, when you look at how it is explained, it's a lot about ignorance, and for Putin's side, it's more like a strategic failure. This is one of the strongest. Now there is also this idea of forgetfulness. So if you go in Warsaw, for example, you have, because at the beginning there was a big financial help and empathy, and also help for the refugee population. And now you have these billboards and also this effort to bring attention to the population, not to forget that the crisis is going on. So then you have it in the second sense, that failure, it's about something being forgotten. So all the time it's drawn attention that we should remember, we should contribute, we should still pay attention that it's going on. This element of what is the impact on the winter and this energy and the atomic bomb. So it's all the time this question of this failure, and whether failure is a tool of success. Well, in a way it is a reinterpretation of the perception of Ukraine in Poland. Yeah, so there are elements of success in this crisis, in the sense that the invasion indeed brought a redefinition of the relations with Russia and of what is the attitude towards the Ukrainian population. So now it's much more positive. So that would be it. A very I sort of improvise, but it is about the future and what will be. If you look at the discussion, it's all about what Putin will do, what European Union will do, and whether we are prepared, yes, for this.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mica. Reflecting on Russia makes me now think about Indonesia and how do we reflect on this uncertainty and contingency that Indonesian government has put us in such condition. But before that, I want to just give another opportunity for participants to ask question or argument or giving feedback. There is one guy is raising hand. Hisham.
Okay, hello.
Yeah, please.
You can hear me clearly?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation, Mica. That I ever researched and I read something about the implication of the pandemic. It's become a crisis in the world, and you just put the failure in attended concept to up. But I miss the explanation of Mr. Supaja. I'm sorry, but I just hear that Mr. Supaja said that we can overcome the situation with a democracy situation. Uh, but I saw I have a different argument that because the pandemic situation has been demonstrated many policy from the government on several countries have a policy to make a authoritarian practice. Like in the first, we can see how the government has diminished transparency based on important advice health from health scientists is that you can call the ignorance situation. And the second, the government has extended surveillance of citizens by launching the numerous offensive uh, mechanism, including amplification, in order to collect to store data for them. And under the situation, under the fear and the panic situation, as well as to ensure their safety, it's easier for citizens to surrender to the government regulation by downloading this application. So it is I don't know it is good or not for our future as a citizen, because we need the uh, how the pandemic became changed for the government to extend their power to eliminate dissent and extending state surveillance. And the third, the government also has net military power, as well as in Indonesia. We I don't know why I don't know, in Indonesia, in pandemic situation that military, the government used the military power to make a, or to overcome, maybe to solve the pandemic crisis, and then it is, I don't know, it is kind of your, it is match with your explanation about your concept or not, that uh, how you argument about the situation of this, that uh, many government now, like in Brazil, like in Hungary and Brazil, how they use pandemic to cover and extend their power, like Indonesia with application, with application about the health science, uh, application to launch numerous of, yeah, of citizens. How how maybe you can give argument about this situation, how the government make, yeah, I don't know I'm pretty um uh I'm just pessimistic with our future, because we just uh need the power of government, like the authoritarian policy, because this pandemic. Thank you. Maybe.
Thank you.
Yes.
To make up.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I mean, I'm not studying this particular policy regimes. We've only trying now. We are in contact with Dr. Supraja, so I think that we will engage in some partnership of collaboration, and then I will be more familiar, and you will be more familiar with what's going on here. But in terms of analytical exploration, this falls under this idea of crisis exploitation. Yes. So, for example, but I would like to draw attention that it's not only the political elites. So I think in the literature, it's much more. Yeah, of course, it's always easier to show how political elites in a situation of crisis the normative system is getting much more stricter, and the crisis it's used as a tool to reproduce certain power relations and to make a statement about the power relations in the society. But it's not something that, I mean, in the case of public political elites and these elements of surveillance via application, also how it was in Israel, and I think it's much more visible. But the idea is that this crisis exploitation is also happening even business as usual, for example, in public policy. So whenever you come across a failure or a situation of crisis, this is an opportunity to increase discipline, to introduce some oppressive measures. Yes, for example, so it's not only about the political elites. I think it's a much more common element that failure, when it's acknowledged, or a situation of crisis, it allows mechanisms of discipline and surveillance to enter the scene. For example, I'm a mother. Let's say it's just a very, but maybe to give another example. And for example, every potential failure of the child, it gives me a window of opportunity to increase the discipline. For example, bad grades in the classroom, cutting off internet time, but it allows. I mean, failure, it's bad as it is, and the crisis, but it always allows to increase the discipline. And it's not something political elites do, but also at the level, even, and this is why it is so powerful, that this exploitation is so powerful. But the problem then it is, again, who can act on failure has the power, and who doesn't, it's marginalized in the society. So I agree, it's an element of crisis exploitation, but I would like to draw attention that political elites are just the most visible in this game. And actually, I think it's a much more common phenomenon. If you analyze your reaction to failure of other people you think you can control, and then how their potential failures allow you to interfere even more then it's become visible that it's a much more general phenomenon. Thank you.
Okay. Continuing previous questions about the tendency a country to become authoritarian in a crisis. Actually, Dina Sujikto has quite similar crisis nuanced question about the ecological crisis. But Dina, do you want to go forward with your questions, or should I just read it? Oh, okay, Mbak Dina.
Mas Ragil. Thank you,
Yeah,
Mas
please.
Ragil.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mica, for your presentation. It's really interesting to know how the concept of failure has such a broad meaning in different contexts and circumstances. And so I'm going to go straight to my question. Do you think that the ecological crisis is in its context and dynamics is considered as a failure? Because from functionalist, well, in my opinion, from functionalist perspective, we can say that industries in capitalist system fail to calculate their environmental costs. And so it's an unintended consequences because of their unpreparedness in calculating and predicting the environmental crisis. So can you verify on that? And do you think the ecological crisis belongs to one of the varieties of the values research? You mentioned three typologies of values research, such as the changing circumstance, and then the marginalization, and also the dynamics of values, failure and success. So that's my question. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mas Ragil, Mas Praja.
Yep, Mica, please.
Yes, thank you very much for. It's a very good. I think it's a very good observation, and I also I think we should welcome that it changes. It brings like a new territory in the discussion. So let me just say that, the ecological crisis. It's the present. It's the future. Future crisis event. So this is something that we know it will happen, but we somehow ignore it. Yes, so there is, if you look at the literature, strategic ignorance, it is a very useful term to explain responses to ecological concerns in the societies. So, for example, we know that eating meat in such big quantities increases carbon emissions, but we somehow ignore it. So it's a lot of unknown knowns and a lot of ignorance going on. So we know, but it's not enough for acting. It's not enough to change the behavior. It's also this element that the ecological crisis which is going on, it's individualized at the level of the institutions or the level of the individuals. So this allows to ignore maybe the what other institutions and what states should do. So, but in the literature, I think that the ecological future crisis, it's mostly discussed in relation to ignorance and strategic ignorance. There was this movie. Even you can see it in the pop culture. There was this American movie about Don't Look Up. So it was it's about so some researchers know that the world will be hit by a comet. Even the president finds out. It's an American movie, but they all ignore it. So they don't take the scientists seriously, and they ignore the situation. So it is about, they even use this element of strategic ignorance. So it is a crisis. Are we prepared for, or we know? We rather, the problem is that it's a strategic ignorance. But it's the future. It's in the future. So it takes place. Yes, and it's the strategic ignorance is the key word, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mica. Since you mentioned Don't Look Up, it is one of my favorite films, and it captures the way or the method the politician really ignore the condition. And speaking about the ignorance, we have one last questions. It has something to do with what Mbak Dina has put forward about the failure capitalists to calculate. I would say that the capitalism successfully failed to calculate and successfully being ignorant towards the environmental problem. And our participant one last question asked that can we integrate the concept of failure with the concept of hope? For example, can we be more optimistic in stating that capitalism's project to reset the world always has the possibility of failure? And how do you see that?
Okay, thank you very much. So there is, in terms of, so one of the researchers we are working with in this our global social network on failure, he happens to be Stuart Firestein. He wrote a book on ignorance and on failure, but he is coming from neural biology, so he's not a social scientist, but he is now writing, he's linking now this issue of ignorance and failure with presenting them in a much more, like, in terms of like social theory. And one of his idea is that science, and I think it's one of the areas where you can fail. So he's saying that now he's, for example, because the idea of hope. So now you can see that he even has a speech on idea of optimism. So he thinks that there are domains where failure, and this is science, where failure is linked with optimism. So it's not it is a link between, and also like capitalism, for example, the American dream. It's also this idea that failure will lead to success. Yeah. So this, what is going on in education, that in education studies, that you fail, but if you are productive and you apply and you are persistent enough, it will lead to success. So there are some domains where failure is linked with optimism, and it does not lead to marginalization, and this is science, but we should have in mind that people who are doing science, they come from a privileged position. So usually they are linked, they come from, they have the social position to engage with failure. So you can try with experiments, and it is linked with hope and optimism. But there are a lot of areas in public policy where you don't get to have, you don't have to have a second chance. So it is linked with optimism, but I think only in certain domains. But capitalism, usually it has this idea that even crisis is good for the reproduction of capitalism. Yes, so it is, but we have to be critical that linking them, it always comes from a position of privilege. I think.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you very much.
Mica. That was our last question, actually. There is one more that just came up on the chat room, but I think maybe just quick question, Ferry, and Dr. Mica will also answer in quite short because we started to run out of time. So please go ahead, Ferry, but short.
Okay, thank you very much for Mas Ragil and Mas Praja. For Professor Mica, I'm apologize if I have a false interpretation about your theory. This is the huge theory for me, and I have to make the hard struggling to interpretation about what you say in this theory. But I have one question for you. In your theory, in your huge theory, if you make some explanation about unintended and so on, are you make the perspective from Sigmund Bauman about a liquid modernity and representative about uncertain world? Thank you, Professor Mica. Thank you, Mas Ragil and Mas Praja.
You're welcome.
Okay, Dr. Mica, maybe short and brief.
Yes. So now it's more about, it's not uncertainty. Now it's more about controllability. So there was this issue of uncertainty and problematization, but now it's more about design, planning, and the future. It's not that you know what is going on, but you ignore it. But the idea is that whether you take control. So I would like to draw attention to to this issue of complexity and uncontrollability, which somehow replaces the debates on uncertainty, which are very relevant, but now it's more an issue of control that it's problematic. But
Okay.
thank you very much.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
guys.
Yeah.
We do, well, I personally do really want to continue this discussion, but we have already gone through 2 hours, and I don't want to use all these moments to discuss any ideas with Dr. Mica, because we have to provide some space. We have to anticipate the coming of Dr. Mica next year, and I believe that we will sit down and have a continuing discussion on this matter. Actually, I have some points, but seems the participants seems to have been delivering it, representing it. So I better keep my points on my phone, and I am willing to discuss it in the future again with you in the near future, in the next years. So that's it. I personally really happy to have witnessed, to have moderate these discussions, and I personally thank Sociology Center and Department of Sociology, and also Mas Praja for connecting us with Dr. Mica. It would haven't happened if Mas Praja did not connect us with Dr. Mica. And also Hartmantyo, thank you so much for helping us arranging these events, these discussions, for sending email to Dr. Mica with all those paperworks. Thank you so much. I'm certain that next year Hartmantyo also will join us in a discussion as well as with the students. And before I close it, I truly want to hear final remarks, maybe from Dr. Mica and Dr. Supraja, before we start to prepare dinner for us and maybe lunch for Dr. Mica. Okay, maybe Dr. Mica first, final remarks.
So I think thank you very much. I would like just to say that I'm really impressed by this synergy, and then I think the question were coming from different directions. I would like to acknowledge it's obvious that the students are very skilled in also in addressing questions, but also in seeing and anticipating all these connections. And I think I mean, I'm personally very impressed with this synergy, and I would like to congratulate you for and to thank you for organizing this meeting. But I'm also I'm very thankful for the student community and from the people from the university for making this happening. I think it's very it's amazing to see this curiosity evolving. So thank you very much.
Okay, then thank you, Dr. Mica. I hope you really enjoy our time together this afternoon. Mas Praja, please, final remarks.
Okay, Dr. Mica, I think I thanks for your kindness to give lectures for us, for my student from many levels. And I think what have happened for today is discussion with fruitful, so many ideas, so many new terms, and it is homework for us to explore, to make deeper, because there are so many new terminology come from you, because you have so serious to have a concern to do and making this research so known all over the world. You have produced so many articles, many books, and of course I try to introduce what your ideas that we discussed today to students and to discuss again. Yeah, there are so many new terminology like lack of anticipation, lack of preparation, strategic ignorance. This is all new for us. Yeah, we know, but we never have specific concern about this. So I hope you never bored to give this kind of lecture to us. And of course, I wait for your coming to Gajah Mada University, have a meeting with my student, and maybe a free discussion with our college, our student, and at the end, again and again, I thanks for you for your kindness, Mica. Thank you very much, Mica.
Okay.
And thanks for Wagil, and thank for
Thank you
Mas
very much.
Adi. Thank you very much for Tio and
Thank
my
you very
student
much.
all. Thank you very much, Mica. See you.
Okay.
I'm also very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mas Praja. And once again, it wouldn't have happened without you connecting us with Dr. Mica. So thank you
Yeah,
so much.
true.
I'm really I'm really excited to have you, Dr. Mica, here in Indonesia next year, as well as with the students and maybe other colleagues will join us. That's it.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much, everyone. Dr. Mica, Dr. Mas
Thank you
Praja.
very much.
Thank you. Thank
See
you very
you
much.
around. Have a nice dinner. Have a nice lunch. Bye.
Thank you.
See you all
Have a
of
nice
Thank
day. Have a
you.
nice day. Bye bye.
See you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See
Bye bye.
you. Bye-bye.